As I understand it, Kylie, your parable is all about building houses.
Yes.
Do you want to just unpack your parable a little bit and lead us into it, and then I'm sure these guys will have plenty of things they'd like to ask you.
Yeah, so the parable that I'm kind of representing today is from Luke 6, and it's a parable about the house on a rock. And it starts off really strong. Jesus says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do the things that I say?" And he says...
It's fairly hitting you right
Yeah.
between the
It's
eyes.
exactly where you're finished, I suppose.
And he says, "Whoever comes to me and hears my sayings and does them," so whoever comes, hears and does, is like a man who has built his house on a solid foundation, on a solid rock. And Jesus tells a story about when the storm comes, his house stands true and stands strong, but someone who builds their house on a weaker foundation or on the sand, when the storm comes, they're beaten down by the storm and the ruin is great. So that's my story in a nutshell. And looking at, verses from the Bible that talk about Jesus being the cornerstone and being that firm foundation and being what we want to build our lives on. It's a pretty strong message about making sure that you have really truly connected to that foundation and that you've got your foundation right. Back in the Bible times, it was apparently tempting to build your house on like dried out sand during the summer or the hotter months, and then when the wetter months would come, that seemingly solid foundation would turn into what one scholar calls the consistency of chocolate pudding. So
Sounds
Please tell us.
Yeah, I wouldn't want my house to be dependent on
Nutella.
Edible house.
So yeah, it seemed really solid what they built their house on first, and by building on that, they would have avoided having to dig in deeper underneath to get to the rock, and they would have avoided like a big cost, time, and a huge job
Those
to
site
do
costs
that.
are a killer.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where the story is coming from is, make sure that your house is built on a rock of Jesus, and that your connection to that rock is firm. And then you'll be unshakable.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because both houses would look the same. And I mean, the house is the bit that we do, really, isn't it? We don't do the foundation. God's made that. There's a rock there or there's sand there. But, it's like you can make a really pretty house irrespective of where it's built. And if you're more focused on that than you are on the foundation, there's going to be trouble. The other thing I really find interesting about this parable, there's no maybe a storm will come in this story.
When?
That's right.
Yeah, it just makes it clear when the storm comes. That's a bit depressing, really, isn't it? But, do you think that's a commentary on Christian life, living in a storm?
Yeah, well, I think absolutely. We all have challenges that we face in this world of sin that we're living in during the delay before Jesus comes back. And I think, that's very telling that we will face challenges, and that I guess the way we prepare before those challenges come will determine our success in that, and that is rests on our connection to Jesus.
I think of parts of the United States where they're prone to cyclones and tornadoes for months of the year. And you watch all sorts of movies and TV and news, and you actually see that part of what they do there is have that preparation. When you build your house, you have a basement or you have some kind of shelter so that when the tornado comes, you can escape to that place of safety. And so what I'm wanting to kind of take from that is, they know there in those parts of the United States that the storm is coming. So for you, with this parable, what is the storm? What storm are we awaiting?
Yeah, it could be anything. From my understanding of the story, and feel free to join in, it could be just anything that the devil has to throw at us, the challenges of life. It could be something more subtle like the busyness, the storm of consumerism that surrounds us. It could be a really big, terrible event that's happened. It could be sickness, just, the things that are not part of God's ultimate plan for us, the things that come our way while we're in this in-between time, waiting for Him to come.
I think He allows some storms to come, believe it or not. If you link it to my parable, I was just reading, as I was going through this, for this stuff, the passage before about the end of the world, and I'd actually noticed something. I read something I'd not noticed before. Basically, Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount, I guess it is, I think, on the signs of the end of the age, says basically there's going to be great distress before Jesus returned, unequaled in history, and never to be repeated again. So if by chance, or if we are actually living in the end of time, we are likely, in fact certain, to face this storm. If we are living at the time just before the end, just before the end of the world or the return of Christ, and that's a pretty, that also is a confronting message, a very confronting scenario. What do you mean? I've got to live through this period that's the worst period on earth ever,
and will be again.
I mean, I'd better start thinking about getting ready for that, if in fact it's the case. That's confronting and challenging for me. So whatever, but I also agree that there are so many other storms in our life, and maybe some of the the other storms lead up. I mean, who knows? God has a plan for our life, but there's plenty of storms.
There's two. I mean, there's a personal level. The personal storms that we all face, and then there's that whole prophetic end time cataclysmic series of events that is also, almost like a global storm that last generation will go through. Bringing it back to the personal one, I heard a comment, someone asked Stephen Fry, the renowned atheist Stephen Fry, what would he say to God if he actually died and met God face to face, if he was wrong and he actually did meet God, not believing in him? What would he say to him? The first thing would be that
I think we watched the same clip here.
Yeah, could have,
It's a great clip.
Yeah, and he turns around and he says to God, this is what he says he would say. He said he would look at God in the eye and he would say, brain cancer in children? Really?
Yeah.
That's why he doesn't believe. For him, that's the storm. And other people have said that the fact that bad things can happen to good people is the rock on which belief founders and atheism is built. And so for many, that's the storm that they can't get beyond. But I guess if we recognise that even as Christians, everybody dies. That's the tragedy of sin. And whether you're a child in a tragedy, a child who has cancer, or if you're an elderly person, gasping out their last breaths in their life, everybody's dying, and that's the abomination of sin.
It is,
and that's what God comes to give us a second chance.
I think one of the things you've highlighted there, Tony, is that's the storm for them.
Yeah,
and so the question I would ask is, have they waited too long to build their house on the foundation? Because the storm's already there before they're built. So they haven't found...
They're trying to build their house within the storm.
Yeah. And when you try to build within a storm,
call.
what are you going to achieve? Because you've got water and wind and all sorts of stuff.
Well, it's interesting,
everywhere.
I think it comes back to what Diane was talking about before, that, lighthouses have been built in the middle of the ocean. And the only way to be able to do it is to clear a space, to create a space, to pump the water out and to find rock, even on the bottom of the ocean that's surrounded by water. You've still got to find that solid foundation. And those lighthouses, many of them have been there for, hundreds of years. 150, 200 years now, being continually battered. And they're still standing because even in the middle of the ocean, they've been able to find a solid foundation. So even within the storm, it's obviously it's preferable to do it, in calm weather, but
it's kind of like
if you've got no option, you've got no option.
It's like an invitation for shelter, knowing that the storm is coming. If you know a tornado is coming, you've got nowhere to go. You're in pretty bad shape. Right? To use the illustration you were using before. So it's what these parables are about. It's an invitation from God to shelter in His love and to survive the storm, to get over the challenge of sin and destruction. And choice. We have the choice. We can choose to take shelter, or we can choose to stand in the storm and try and use our own muscles to beat fight the storm ourselves. Pretty hard to do that if it's a pretty serious tornado. It's like a tsunami coming on the shore. Well, I've got the invitation for shelter, or I can just stand here and just see if I can fight the tsunami. Well, many people have done that, have just lost their life. And that's the tragedy of it. The beauty is we have an invitation and we can move. So why not make the choice and move?
To live in the kingdom now.
Now, Tony, you were talking about being able to find a solid foundation even in the midst of the middle of the ocean. And taking that back to what you were saying before, Kylie, about...
Some people use an anchor.
Yeah. Still finding a foundation somewhere, something to hook
Still got
onto.
something solid, yeah.
Kylie, you were saying that some people back in this time would build their house on hardened or compacted sand during the warmer months. What effect would the belting elements have on that compacted sand to turn it to that chocolate pudding-like substance? What things in life would come up that might erode that?
I think that's the key word, erode, is that you're saying. It's just like wearing it down. And it's, I guess it kind of fits with this metaphor of building, which is something that happens gradually. And rather than letting something erode, let it build it up. And I guess, Jesus was a carpenter, so he knew what it was to build things. And
Good call.
yeah, for him it would have been enjoyable to build it like a project. So it's almost like we've got this project build. It takes maintenance, and do that rather than the opposite, which would be choose a foundation that's going to be eroded by things. And I guess erosion is something that can happen when you don't even realise. And then all of a sudden something's falling over and it's collapsed. So that's almost like a silent storm, which I think is valid as well.
You mentioned a couple of things in the service, different types of things that would cause erosion, and you talked about water and wind and frost and heat. And I think you had, they were kind of metaphors in many ways.
Yeah. So Monica Capusi, who did present this had really, and it was really interesting what she did. She did kind of unpack those things that could do that erosion. So she's talked about water, that could erode, like watering down truth, where we're compromising and we're letting things be watered down. She also talked about wind, and almost like the winds of new teaching, things that come sweeping in and maybe take us off path. She also talked about frost, or the chill, and she looked at that as possibly like the lack of love and authenticity that can erode us and wear us down.
The love of most will grow cold, says in Matthew,
And the last one that she had was heat, and looking at that as kind of a like stress and tension that can also erode us and weaken our foundation. And I guess the big thing is that if Jesus is our cornerstone and he is our rock and we're connected to him, then we won't be eroded. So it's being aware of our foundation. Is it the right foundation? Are we maintaining that? And is our connection to that being reinforced? Otherwise we could, without even knowing it, our house could be moved to a weaker foundation that can be eroded.
It's interesting, all these parables come from all different places, but there's some really, common themes.
Completely different stories.
And a corollary to what we've just been talking about there would be the parable of the sower and the way in which some seeds don't survive, they don't make it to fruition. And Jesus says for one of them, it's specifically because the cares and anxieties of the world basically strangle the plant such that it can't find a foundation and grow. Correct. So again, coming back to those things that work against us, work to beat us down, the cares and anxieties get prominence in Jesus' teaching, and how true is that today in the 21st century?
We do need to move on. I just want to make one final comment on yours, Kylie, before we move on to Ewan, and that is that even during the midst of the storm, you can look right through the Bible, especially in the New Testament. And I think the awesome thing is that Jesus calms the storm. And so no matter what you're going through in life, Jesus calms that. So if you cement yourself, if you put yourself on the foundation of your relationship with him, he will calm the storm to let you survive through that.
Yeah. And that reminds me of something you were saying before, Tony, about let's keep our faith in our foundation and know that if Jesus is our foundation, that we are unshakable, and that's our strength.
Good call. So that's kind of your take-home message.
Bet you to it.
Very good.